development for Dust was ongoing. Quote, Dust 514 was a PlayStation 3 only FPS set in the EVE universe. Its limitations and flaws were obvious. Now CCP are bringing a reimagined version of Dust to PC with a greater focus on community, customization, and emergence. It's an attempt to marry the free-form story-generating magic of EVE to a modern multiplayer shooter. Dust 514 and Project Legion share a common DNA, but Legion is a very different experience, says Jean-Charles Godachon, executive producer. It's a competitive shooter that takes place in a sandbox that mixes PvP and PvE. There's also a player-driven economy, which is really important. If you use the EVE name, you have to have an economy that's influenced by the players. It's all about loot, is how Godachon puts it. We're going to have these sandbox areas, planets that you'll drop into, where you'll see other players and an ambient threat. In high security
Your skill has increased.
Concord are present to protect you, it's more of a social place. Here you'll go looting with AI-controlled drones trying to stop you. End quote. Even if CCP were unwilling to admit it themselves, the message to players of Dust 514, EVE Online, and the rest of the gaming public was clear. To the company, Dust was a failure, and the only question that remained was how long it would be allowed to continue. In the meantime, CCP was also driving excitement for their new VR game, EVE Valkyrie, and much like their other games, the visuals were attracting immediate attention and building anticipation. With this game, CCP were again attempting to entice the general gaming public into the EVE setting of New Eden, where they had failed before with their various
Rest
other
your weary
materials.
bones for a spell.
These perceived failures were cemented when, in October of 2015, it was announced that CCP Games was selling White Wolf
Rest your
to
weary
another
bones for a
game
spell.
publisher, Paradox Interactive, known
Do
for their
not
intricate
seek
strategy and simulation games, such as Crusader Kings, Hearts of Iron, Europa Universalis, and Mountain Blade. Despite these struggles, by the mid-2010s, EVE Online had more subscribers than at any other point in its history. While the subscriber count would rise and fall with the breath of warfare and peace, the overall trend was still positive. And even as players burned out on the game after long, brutal wars, many would inevitably return. Despite the lukewarm reception of many new features, the basic features of the game had seen continual improvement and well-received iterations, from server stability to graphics, and despite the age of the game and its poor new player experience, it continued to attract players due to its continual modernization. As it was, EVE Online still promised to provide CCP with continuous, reliable capital for the foreseeable future, and the company was intent on building out their library of games. And now that they had sold White Wolf, they resolved that it was time to focus on building out New Eden. This was reinforced by another release from CCP titled Gunjack, an arcade shooter for VR in which the player takes on the
Which
role
trainer
of
do
a
you
gunner
seek?
for a mining
Marion
expedition
Call is
in
keeping
New
Dark
Eden,
Cleric Beryl
protecting
company in the
against
reading room
pirates.
upstairs
While a
at the
relatively
Gallows End
small
Tavern
release,
on the
it
southeast
received
edge of
positive
Brill.
reviews, but the
I'm
main
just
studio
Your skill has
dying to
increased.
win that
seems to have
staring
spoken
contest.
little about it. But as Crowd Control Productions seemed to be entering a new phase of their lifespan, so too was the world of
You've been
EVE
examined.
Online, defined largely by a single group of players whose clear ambition was to dominate all of New Eden. With all other major competitors in nullsec eliminated, the Goons and their federation had very few enemies with the resources to combat them. After consolidating their vast new territory, their first order of business was a name change. In April of 2015, the Mittani, leader of the Goons, announced that the CFC would be changing its name to the Imperium, something far more palatable to a vast swath of onlookers. While perhaps less representative of the attitude of the Goons and their allies in the past, This was a symbolic representation of their new stated purpose of becoming not only the most powerful, but the dominant force in the entire game. To the Mittani, whose flair for the dramatic and desire for attention were well documented, the expletive in the cluster coalition's name was a reflection of the irreverent nature of the goons, but a liability to his goal of appealing to onlookers from outside of the game, who had been hesitant to even call them by their name. Articles in national media outlets such as Forbes had an obviously positive effect on morale, and gave the players a stronger incentive to join fleets when called, suggesting that they were cementing their place in history. Later that year, he would attempt to crystallize this concept far more clearly. On November 3rd, 2015, the Mittani and military fiction author Jeff Edwards announced the opening of a Kickstarter to begin production on a book titled The Fountain War, named for the eponymous conflict in which the CFC had annihilated the Reddit-based Test Alliance. Notably, Crowd Control Productions had also chosen to endorse the project. The opening of the description read, quote, "The Fountain War book project brings best-selling author Jeff Edwards together with the Mittani Media and CCP in creating the first ever book about EVE Online based on real player experiences. The resulting novel will be the first book of a completely new genre, sci-fi nonfiction." On the afternoon of July 28, 2013, the armadas of interstellar empires clashed. Millions died, billions destroyed. It might have happened in a fictional universe, but that doesn't make it any less true. This is the Fountain War, the war that changed gaming history. A galactic firestorm that culminated in the largest single battle in gaming history, the fall of 6VDT. It consumed the players of EVE Online, it astounded the worldwide gaming community, and it commanded the attention of the mainstream press. Rather than allow those memories and fascinating narratives to fade, we're going to immortalize those experiences by creating a world-class retelling of the Fountain War, a gut-wrenching thriller based on battle archives, in-game communication transcripts, and the testimonies of combatants from all sides of the conflict. Combining the remarkable writing talent of Jeff Edwards with the strength and support of CCP Games and the Mittani Media.
Oh, I got him before he killed me. Oh, yeah.
Science fiction, action, suspense, and military fiction fans.
Gotta watch this thing. I can kill him in one hit, but he'll kill me in one hit.
For $150,000 US.
Gotta watch him or he'll kill me. Gotta sit here for about a minute and just wait.
For years, the Goons have been taking sponsorships to push games besides EVE Online to the Alliance, business ventures that have proven lucrative to both parties. Similarly, this project would be pushed to their constituent members. But onlookers were dubious.
I'm gonna be okay.
The Kickstarter page included a writing sample near the bottom, and a piece of historical revisionism was already immediately apparent. Though they had been known as the Cluster Coalition during the war,
Don't do it.
the name
Just
had
die.
conspicuously been changed to the Imperium, the new name chosen only 7 months
Beastmaster is
prior.
so fun.
This change
Like
led
Solo.
many to believe that this project
If you have
would
something to do in the
simply be another
background.
piece of goon propaganda. But not even the goons themselves seemed terribly excited about the project. Significantly shy of meeting their goal, the project was only able to raise $39,000 from 758 backers, a quarter of what they needed. The Mittani's official statement on the Kickstarter's cancellation made clear his frustration. It read in part, quote, "In about an hour, I'm going to nuke the Kickstarter for the Fountain War and announce that it will be relaunched in March without all the stupid and now obvious f***ups. The 150K funding goal, the backer rewards, the shipping costs, the lack of sample fiction, the whole thing was rushed as and an easy win turned into an opportunity for our enemies to come at us with long knives and settle scores. The ultimate responsibility is mine. We've never listened to outside experts on anything, but for some reason on this one, even though my intuition was screaming that was wrong, I did the, what do I know, I just run a big space guild. And next thing you know, the whole coalition is attached to a f***ed-up version of what is legitimately a really cool project. The f***up was not outsiders led us astray, blame them. The f***up was listening to them at all. Whose fault? Mine. Every one of you got dragged along behind that mess, and I've been kicking myself non-stop since it began. And I'm sorry. The most obvious fuck-up was not making a thread on goonfleet.com saying, yo, here's what we want to do, how should we do this, and what rewards and pricing, etc. do you guys think would be cool, and all this would have been avoided. End quote. Their imperial aims in-game, however, would remain unperturbed, and their boldness and confidence would be illustrated well in the public demands that they would soon make. On November 30th, 2015, the Mittani released a statement titled, Minifoe, there's only one way to deal with Rome. The naming scheme of the goons' internal bureaucracy mirrored that of George Orwell's book, 1984, with Mini used as shorthand for ministry. The side of the page was adorned with an advertisement for the doomed Kickstarter project. The release read in part, quote, the Imperium is delighted to present a new department within our bastion of civilization and prosperity, the Ministry of Foreign Oversight, aka Minifoe. Fofo.
What?
The Ministry of Foreign Oversight exists to promote imperial values of unity, discipline, and victory in regions near Imperium space, but outside of direct sovereignty control. It is our hope that through Minifoe, we can bring civilization and order to a galaxy which has increasingly descended into incoherent, screeching barbarism. We will usher in a new era of enlightenment and opportunity to those who are not yet able to call themselves imperial citizens or experience the security, prosperity, and variety we enjoy in the galactic Northwest. Representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Oversight offer loyal imperial subjects a number of benefits in return for a small bi-monthly fee. We understand that as a new dark age sweeps across the unenlightened territories of New Eden, some will undoubtedly refuse the kind and polite entreaties of Minifoe in their attempts to elevate their situation. To aid in the establishment of a dominion, the Imperium's Black Fleet has been tasked to ensure that pacification and security are established in a smooth and orderly fashion. Look forward to civilization. Look forward to the arrival of the Ministry of Foreign Oversight and its smiling, polite representatives.
Smiling politely.
And hope are on the way.
Hope and hope are on the way.
Quote. This release was dotted with links that left little room for interpretation of the Mittani's aggressive and tyrannical intentions. For example, the words small bi-monthly fee linked to a clip from the movie Goodfellas hosted on YouTube titled You Pay Me, in which the extortion and support system of the Italian mafia was explained in basic terms. The words Black Fleet linked to the Wikipedia page for Black Ships, the Japanese name for the European ships used to force open Japanese ports to Western trade, and the words smooth and orderly fashion linked to a clip from the television show Firefly, in which the captain of the smuggling ship Serenity kicks a bandit leader into an engine turbine after he swears vengeance. The following day, the Imperium announced how this subjugation would take place. The Viceroyalty Program. The most remarkable aspect of these demands was that they weren't limited to those in Nullsec. This extended to the twilight regions of low-security space as well, where pirates and griefers plied their ships to the purpose of destroying and claiming whatever they could. In a public post, the propaganda arm of the Imperium announced that, quote, the Imperium's plan, organized under the Ministry of Foreign Oversight, involves viceroys, or governors, contacting regional leaders with an offer that comes with two options. The first option is to take the benefits package of the Imperium in return for simple, reasonable bi-monthly fees and/or tribute. The second option is much more violent. If a subject alliance denies the offer, the full might of the Imperium will deploy and exterminate the subject alliance's sovereignty and assets. At first, there will be loads of resistance and rebellion, but that is the point. Resistance means war, and war means everyone gets to shoot spaceships. End quote. The different benefits and tribute methods were detailed below this, but the proposals were comical in their boldness and almost certainly intended to trigger an aggressive and hostile response. Eve News 24 attempted to capture the general sentiment in an article titled "Imperium Viceroyalty Met with Defiance." Quote, "This announcement has effectively declared hostilities on the rest of New Eden. The Imperium has officially begun the Viceroyalty program and is actively targeting groups in neighboring regions." End quote. Below was included an exchange between an Imperium Viceroy and one of the alliances that they intended to subjugate. After the Viceroy demanded a 10 billion ISK deposit and informed them that their tribute would be expected every 2 weeks, the leader of the alliance, Merovingian, said 117 billion. The Viceroy replied, 117 billion, I'm sorry, I don't follow. Merovingian continued, 117 billion ISK. It's what you guys are gonna pay us to stop burning your assets to the ground when you come here. Send Mittens my regards. End quote. Here, the name Mittens is a nickname for the Mittani, used either affectionately or derisively, depending on the context. It would only be days before the Imperium began their assault on the low-sec empires, but they were met with stiff resistance by the largest corporations, including snuffed-out and psychotic tendencies, who were able to turn fights against them, even when outmatched. Inspired by their first unlikely victory, the rest of Losec decided that, for the first time in history, it was time for the various pirates, bandits, and griefers to band together and ward off this threat to their way of life, creating an entity that they named Losec Voltron. Speaking to Crossing Zebra's Imperium Fleet Commander Lemba said, quote, "Losec entities are ridiculously good at fighting with smaller numbers but with more proficiency. The Imperium's idea of nullsec fighting is far different from what is needed for lowsec fighting. The first few times, including a fight I commanded, we got wasted. It doesn't matter how many numbers you bring, if the enemy brings a bad comp with perfect logic and implants and outplays you, there is nothing you can do but die." End quote. If the Imperium was to subjugate New Eden, they would have to do so inch by inch, and it was clear that this group was more than a match for the forces of the Imperium, repelling them in multiple battles against bad odds. But this war would not be allowed to continue for long, for soon a force long believed to be in repose would suddenly awaken, and their actions would drastically alter the fate of New Eden. For years, while the alliances in Nullsec jockeyed for territory and resources, wormhole space churned, the Lowsec corporations struggled defiantly for their independence, and those in Highsec looked on nervously. Another force had been openly gaining power with nobody to check them, and in fact, many of the biggest players in New Eden were funding them. The casinos. Far from underground operations, these casinos had become well-known and well-loved by many players, and their advertisements could be found everywhere, even on the Mittani's own website. Those that ran the casinos were commensurately wealthy, and this wealth would sometimes attract attention when it was flaunted. One of the most memorable was Your skill has increased. Skill injector incident. In 2015, Crowd Control Productions had introduced a new item into the game called skill extractors, which could be purchased with a currency obtainable only with real-world money. These extractors could be used to draw skill points from a character to make a skill injector, and either injected into the character again to redistribute points given to another of the player's characters, or sold on the in-game market for ISK. These skill injectors were valuable, and it was for this reason that they were chosen for a stunt that is still remembered years later. As Jehoiakim Goldstein wrote for Eve News 24, quote, ISK Ironbank of the ISK gambling website iwantisk.com has just maxed out a 3-day-old pilot with every skill in Eve through the use of skill injectors. The ISK trillionaire created his pilot under the name of Ironbank and injected all of the skills and points over the course of about an hour on his stream. The character now stands at 473,344,000
Oh my
points,
god.
with the total value of his purchased skill injectors rounding out to around 1.8 trillion ISK, or $25,000 US should you buy the ISK via Plex. Ironbank had promised his viewers that, in light of the new skill injectors, he would max out a new character live on stream. Quote, my reasons are simple. I had the means to do it, so I did it, and I kept my promise to my viewers. End quote. But the casinos were inconvenient for CCP Games, who were struggling with real money trading, or RMT, the practice of selling in-game currency for real-life money. As writer Matterall put it in an article from late 2015, quote, RMT happens all over Eve, and some guilty players try to launder their money through a gambling site instead of directly putting it in their wallet in an attempt to try and hide their tracks. CCP probably dislikes sites
Your skill
like
has increased,
since it makes their job much harder and necessitates tracking ISK through the web of deposits and winnings, so scrutiny is high from CCP Pellegro and the security team. The I Want ISK Corp wallet is constantly monitored. CCP e-raids are common, leaving suspected RMTers ISK frozen or confiscated while they are investigated. Many times, bankers see money reversed and taken away by CCP. The site ensures bankers' losses in these cases to keep the bankers on the job. If I Want ISK left bankers out to dry, the site would collapse. End quote. Despite the way that the casino owners would flaunt their wealth, the average player was unaware of the amount of power that these organizations could project, primarily because it was never necessary. The casinos would typically react predictably, and had little reason to interfere in the affairs of other organizations as long as outside groups wouldn't meddle in their own affairs. But this would abruptly
Amen
change
to that.
when the circumstances
But yeah,
that
right.
at the time seemed relatively
Yeah,
minute.
right.
The public first learned of the disagreement due to a Reddit post which included chat logs between Eep, the creator and leader of the famous and fabulously wealthy gambling website I Want ISK, and Winnet, the director for the Space Monkeys Alliance, which was a member of the Imperium. The chat log itself was peculiar. After commiserating about their mutual struggle with stomach ulcers, the gambling magnate Eep accused Winnet and Space Monkeys Alliance as a whole of stealing from his bankers after kicking them out of their corporations. Winnet's responses were dismissive. He stated that the removal of the bankers from their corporation was due to them stealing large sums of money from Noobs Corp, their corporation within Space Monkeys Alliance, though he was unclear about the methodology used to uncover this information. Quote, Noobs no longer wanted them in Noobs after they did some analytical thing, and their evidence is 250-ish billion is missing
Analytical
from Corp
thing.
assets. End quote. He then distanced himself and the Alliance from culpability by stating that it wasn't the Space Monkeys Alliance that stole from the bankers, only individuals within a corporation within the Alliance, and therefore this wasn't an Alliance matter. The Space Monkeys would not accept responsibility for what its members did. Quote, SMA leadership didn't scam anyone members within SMA may have, and let's be honest here at Eve. End quote. This was unacceptable to Eep. He threatened that if Space Monkeys didn't pay for what its members had stolen, then I Want ISK would, quote, constantly hire mercenaries to attack anyone related to Space Monkeys Alliance. Winnet replied with a map of Space Monkeys territory on Dotland as a guide for the threatened attacks, and stated that he was unafraid. Dustin, one of the people who have been allegedly scammed by Space Monkeys, saw the trajectory of the conversation and added desperately, quote, Winnet, you have no idea how powerful I Want ISK is. This warning went unregarded. The following day, the Space Monkeys Alliance released an interview with Winnet on their website, where he again alluded vaguely to a large theft from the players.
Your skill has increased.
Corporation, and reiterated his doubt about the threat that I Want ISK posed. Quote, the idea of mercenaries is laughable. SMA is a nullsec alliance and lives solely
No!
in Null.
Oh, the
It's
Dalmal
not
Uncharmed
usually
again.
less
No.
than
Oh well,
vortex
I've
at
gotten
a
pretty
time.
far.
I personally
Son of a
enjoy
bitch,
hearing
man.
we're going to come kill you from
Fucking
people
annoying.
who live in high sec. There were some idle threats of 95
Fucking
carriers
Dalmal
moving into
Uncharmed
range of
immediately.
SMA
Son
home.
of a
That's
bitch,
really
man.
about it. Personally, I would love to see 85 caps within range of our super fleet, let alone the Imperium. I mean, if they want to give us content, I'm all for it. End quote. But this went beyond
Yep,
basic
almost
shipping
22.
scams and
Not bad.
words. A day later, Winnet announced in another interview that members of Space Monkeys
This
Alliance
game steals
who
your
had
quarters,
privileged
it's so
access
annoying.
to I Want ISK were siphoning money from the casino. Quote, to be honest, all the hard work from this point onward goes to our intelligence division, CLIT, and the person we had infiltrate I Want ISK Corp in-game. He had some coding skills and was given access to help code parts of the site, discovering major flaws in the back end of their code in the process. This code was used to do a few things, one of which was to have the coder move ISK to our main accounts. We were not sure if we would be caught here, so we decided to play a different way, which I won't go into too much, but enabled us to win more often. The I Want ISK characters, most of which are still active, were given a better chance at winning in raffles and jackpots. This code was already written into the I Want ISK backend, and any high-level banker had access to it. All this took was quiet hours when no major banker was online to switch the winning accounts to us. End quote. After they had stolen this money and announced this fact to the wider EVE community, members of the Space Monkeys Alliance teased them. As reporter Matterall wrote later, quote, at one point Space Monkeys Alliance then jumped onto I Want ISK's TeamSpeak and chanted ook ook repeatedly. The channel admin kicked them one by one, like monkeys falling off the bed, until the cluster of noisy chimps became a trickle of individual ook ooks. End quote. The more destructive and disruptive action that they took, however, wasn't stealing money, but rather an allegation. Quote, we were dismayed to find that the character of Eep was heavily involved in RMT. The method on how he carried this out is very simple. Essentially, Eep engaged in RMT with a close circle of friends and other people he had gotten to know over time or via word of mouth. They would jump on Skype or TeamSpeak, no physical in-game logs, and ask to buy a battery, code for 1 billion ISK. A battery would cost the player $1, and anything bought in the thousands was given a discount. The money transfers were handled via PayPal, and once the money was received, I Want ISK would credit the purchaser's account on their website with a certain amount of ISK. They would then use low-level bankers to pay out the prize winnings in the same fashion as any normal transaction. In the 2 weeks we monitored these activities, we reported around $1,200 of physical cash made by selling ISK. End quote. This allegation was accompanied with an incriminating audio clip, allegedly of bankers and leaders within I Want ISK apparently
Some kid
discussing
played
real
them
money
all
trading.
because he has
None
like
of
no
this was
moral
taken
compass
lightly
at that
by
age or
Crowd
whatever.
Control Productions,
So he just
who
burned them
swiftly
all.
began
He's like, I don't
handing
care
out
what these
bans
adults
to
say. I'm a
numerous
kid.
players
I'll just
suspected
burn
of
them.
trading
And he
ISK for
burned them
dollars.
all.
to prevent the continued flow of cash through RMC
Smart kid.
pending an investigation.
You can tell he's
This
young. He
had
didn't give a
happened
shit,
before.
and I don't
If
really
Crowd
believe he
Control
should.
Productions could find no
If these idiots
evidence of
give him money,
RMT, then they would
they don't deserve
reinstate
it.
the account and the funds would be returned.
I've never been
Even
rightfully
so, many of
scammed.
the claims
I don't
of
think.
the space monkeys, and specifically
I've had my
rumors,
password
remained
stolen, that's about it.
uncorroborated. In the conclusion to his article, Matterall wrote that, quote, although the story came from SMA originally, they were the least cooperative once the story started turning away from their expectations. Ironically, the I Want ISK bankers were incredibly open and helpful with the access and information, as was ETH. I Want ISK staff sometimes explained things 3 or 4 times to make sure the information was understood correctly. A few prominent players have confidently told me there is RMT happening at I Want ISK's highest level, but for one reason or another cannot supply me with direct evidence. If they had, it would be in this report. End quote. What the public didn't know was that I Want ISK had already signed an
I love
utterly
Beastmaster, it's so
massive
like peaceful and
1.2
awesome.
trillion ISK contract with low-sec corporation's psychotic tendencies significantly before the argument had taken place, tasking the pirates with performing raids on Space Monkey's territory. And when the details of this contract leaked, this disagreement served as retroactive justification. What few knew at the time was that this attack had a larger goal, to distract the forces of the Imperium to an end that would soon become all too clear.
Fuck, I'm full already. Well, let's go back, I guess.
While the fate
It's
of
not
a
that bad of
portion
a
of
walk.
I Want ISK's bankers was in jeopardy, the organization still had vast amounts of liquid assets.
I'll buy a bag.
And these would be bent to a singular purpose. Making good on their promise, I Want ISK offered the fighters of Losec Voltron a lucrative contract, which would pay out for every Space Monkey's asset verifiably destroyed. The low-sec fighters of psychotic tendencies proved more than a match for the quieter, less warlike players of SMA, and the attacks were so brutal that over 1,000 of its players left the Alliance, representing approximately 1/5 of its population. And despite their losses, the Imperium was slow to offer assistance. Only 2 weeks after the contract had been signed, the Space Monkeys had lost 100 billion ISK in assets, 70 billion of which was due to the Alliance's psychotic tendencies. The phenomenal success of these attacks was seen by other
You
alliances
missed.
who quickly became aware of the open contract that I Want ISK had opened on Imperium ships and structures, and soon
God damn it.
corporations were pushing into Imperium territory in war bands, smashing anything that they could find and sending the resulting kill mails to I Want ISK to collect their healthy reward. This pattern showed no signs of slowing, and in fact, the website for I Want ISK was seeing significantly more traffic due to the attention they were receiving. It's likely that they were making even more money than before, money that could be spent on further mercenaries. While the money offered by I Want ISK was tantalizing, the prospect of attacking a group so universally disliked meant that players were arriving from all over New Eden to collect their money, while simultaneously biting chunks out of the Imperium. The belligerent announcement of the Viceroyalty program had turned public opinion sharply against them.
Not the
and
Viceroy
failure in
Picklebottom.
Losec had shown them to be more vulnerable
The
than
Viceroy.
others had expected.
These
Corporations
fucking
and
idiots.
alliances not typically known to take contracts arrived and began drawing battle plans together. The war had begun. What precisely to name it was, and still is, in contention.
The
Many
war.
publications came to call it World War B, given the sheer scope and the fact that it was centered around the Imperium, whose fat bee mascot was instantly recognizable. Even those in high and low security space were eagerly launching attacks into Imperium territory. But the funding source offered another obvious name, one that would often be used colloquially: the Casino War. This latter name was preferred by the Imperium, as it placed more focus upon the eponymous casinos and their suspicious money, as opposed to the Imperium's aggressive and inflammatory disposition and actions that had predicated the war in the first place. Those who had gathered to attack the Imperium had varying affinity to one another, and were clearly cooperating only because of the money offered and their common enemy. And so, even if they won, it was unlikely that this coalition of convenience would remain after the war, but still, they needed a name. Given the fact that they were originally drawn together due to the money, and that nobody disputed that fact, they took to self-deprecatingly calling themselves the Money Badger Coalition, a reference to the contemporary internet meme, Honey Badger Don't Give a F. The possibility of eradicating the Imperium had been floated as recently as November of the previous year by Iwant bankers. Malus Excelian wrote for Crossing Zebras, describing how the Mittani had been tricked into deploying forces to attack an invasion fleet that simply did not exist. Quote, Iwant banker Lenny Kravitz too saw the deployment as a clear sign of the Imperium's weakness. Lenny determined that if the Mittani could be so easily deceived by an obvious ruse, then the Imperium's leader might be losing the situational awareness that had made him so difficult to challenge in the past. He could now be tricked. This might create a window for action that the Imperium's enemies could exploit. Lenny contacted mercenary coalition leader Saber A and asked how much it would cost to bring down the Imperium. Saber estimated that such a war might take as much as 2 years and would cost at least 7 trillion ISK to pay for the necessary number of mercenaries. He was stunned when Lenny blithely stated that he could provide that level of funding. End quote. Nobody was certain what to expect. Never before had such a massive mercenary force been assembled, and the depths of the coffers funding them were unknown to all but their owners. Neither the scale of the Imperium and its capabilities, nor the scale of the Money Badger Coalition had any precedent in the history of New Eden. But this rapid series of failures and the vast enemies arrayed against them already had a severe effect on morale, and Imperium leadership was preparing to cut their losses in extraneous areas of their territory. David Andrews of JustForCrits.com wrote that, quote, after the decision was made to evacuate the Bastion and Lawn out of Vale of the Silent, the Tribute region became the front line for the Casino War, meaning Circle of Two became the front line for the Casino War. That's not exactly an enviable position, particularly for an organization that doesn't really have any beef with the attackers. End quote. The two forces would be tested when an infrastructure
epic bird-on-bird battle. Who's gonna win?
In the system of MTAC-OEE-8, the home system for a constituent Imperium alliance named Circle of Two. On March 28, 2016, nearly 3,500 ships gathered under the Money Badger's banner and prepared for combat, but it was immediately clear that the Imperium was not hopeful for this fight, having only sent 1,300 combatants and holding its super capital fleet from the battle. Despite the lack of firepower, the battle was joined, and the Imperium quickly began to struggle. But something was wrong. First and most obvious, the Money Badgers were fielding capital ships, which should have been prevented by Sino-jammers, which were conspicuously
if I get enough time, I can kill the other one too.
Secondly, Circle of Two, the corporation whose territory was being assailed, wasn't anywhere to be seen. Outside of the battle, more forces were waiting to join. The ancient gaming noob gave his account of the experience, writing, quote, I had finally gotten home and clone jumped to our staging system just in time to catch Oxygen leading a hurricane fleet to the battle for the MTAC-OEE-8 iHub. Oxygen got us out to a Titan within bridge range of the 1P-TAC VL2 constellation, where the biggest battle in ages was playing. We landed on the Titan and waited for a bridge. And waited. And waited. End quote. Then suddenly, as this peculiar and losing battle raged, the leader of Circle of Two made a post to the EVE subreddit that stunned the entire player base. Quote, "For years now, we have been loyal toward the Imperium. We as an alliance
He's gonna
have
kill me,
for a
isn't he?
large part never been
I better
seen
pull.
as a
I better
full
charm.
member by Goon's
Charm, charm.
Federation.
Come on, charm, charm,
As a
charm.
result, we've never
Come on,
been
charm.
treated nor represented
God damn it, he
as
resisted.
such. The basis of the coalition, it being a meritocracy,
Your skill has
became an
increased.
affront over
Come on, you
time.
can do it.
In the same time span, the list of grievances
Come on, you can
grew.
do it. One or two more
I will not
hits.
go into detail as the people involved
There it is.
know full well who
Yeah, I believe in you.
and
You can do
what
it.
I'm talking about. They can mostly be summed up
Come
as
on, kill him.
Goonswarm Federation taking care of their interests.
Your skill has
and
increased.
At the same time,
Please don't
blatantly
TP boom.
disregarding the coalition
Please kill him.
policies they
Please
claim
kill him.
to uphold.
There it is.
Over the
Oh,
past
yeah.
few months, it has become increasingly clear that we have served only as a meat shield. Circle of Two is not a meat shield. We will not stand as the wall that defends Declan from the angry hordes for the benefit of
Poor guy,
Goons.
he's
We will
running.
no longer subject our pilots to the indecency of watching their hard work burn while goons sit in their ivory tower. We will no longer stand as an unequal partner in the Imperium.
It's funny to watch somebody else do.
I
I wonder if I can go steal that mob off him. He's gonna run all the way to zone, isn't he?
Of all
Yeah.
Imperium member alliances as of March 29th, 2016 at 0001 Eve time. End quote. Immediately, the Imperium scrambled a retreat, but it was far too late
Yeah,
to
let
make
him
a
zone
clean
it, fuck it.
disengagement.
I'm hurt
And according
anyways.
to Eve News website Crossing Zebras, the Imperium had lost over 300 billion ISK in the fight, as well as the
I don't want to be
system
here. This
itself.
is the where the
Having
link
salvaged
link
what
kills
they
you.
could of their assets, Circle of Two would now act as the beachhead not for the Imperium,
We'll just
but
pull
their
to
new
right here.
allies in the Money Badger Coalition. The Mittani would later claim that he withheld the Imperium supercapital fleet, knowing that the battle was a trap from Circle of Two, citing the absence of Sino-jammers. Xander Fana, writing for Crossing Zebras, speculated that this betrayal, quote, may galvanize the Imperium into a singular military force that can dispatch the roughly aligned forces of their enemies. But the rest of New Eden were beginning to suspect that the Imperium was seeing the beginning of what Goonswarm had managed to stave off for years, something that they had purposefully induced in other coalitions and alliances. A failure cascade. What followed after Circle of Two betrayed the Imperium was so rapid that there was little time for anyone to react. By the end of March, the Money Badgers had taken the entirety of Vale of the Silent and were actively driving the Imperium out of 3 more regions. Fade had been entirely abandoned. All of this was still being bankrolled by I Want ISK, whose coffers appeared bottomless. The sheer scale of this war had never been seen in New Eden's history, and the Imperium were poised to lose it almost immediately. But the parameters for victory were unclear. Those in the Money Badger Coalition weren't certain how much longer I Want ISK would continue to provide money for the war. What's more, the Imperium was doing all in its power to make this war as annoying as possible. In a discussion for Down the Rabbit Hole, Imperium Fleet Commander Asher compared their strategy to that of Fabius during Hannibal's attack on Rome. Rather than meeting them directly in every engagement, the goal was to annoy their opponents and drag the fighting out for as long as possible to make them lose interest, performing ambushes and laying traps while committing few of their own resources. The Imperium were unwilling to simply retreat and harry any overzealous attacks either. Even into May, the Imperium lodged deep into the low-sec staging system of Saarinen, using it to lash out and even push back into Fade and Pureblind, even as the Money Badger Coalition launched periodic raids. After a particularly brutal battle in the system in May, Asher told Crossing Zebras that, quote, "We still are vastly outnumbered. There is no stratagem where direct conflict works. We still plan to deny all ratting in the north and punish all capital usage where the entire Money Badger Coalition isn't formed to defend them." End quote. But even as the Imperium shed allies in the attacks, the prospect of destroying them entirely seemed unlikely. As Greedy Goblin wrote for his blog in 2016, quote, "No one can finish an EVE alliance unless their leaders give up. You can take their moons, their sov, their stations,
Yeah, it doesn't
you can
matter.
make the opportunistic members leave.
The pilots
But
are
as
still
long as
there.
the leaders stay, there will be enough core members who stay because of loyalty, friends, or simply content. Remember Test, broken and evicted, but as leaders stayed, they came back and now boldly spam memes against goons while pooping on their lawn." End quote. Also recognizing that they couldn't afford to spread their forces too thin, what remained of the Imperium launched an attack on the contemporary residents of Delve, seeking to once again take the region for themselves, displacing their current residents with their massive supercapital fleet. However,
Oh, I'm misunderstanding. I'm sorry. There we go. That's a lot better. Jesus, I didn't know.
Yinton, writing for Crossing Zebras, provided a list in mid-July. Quote, "I would like to explain why I am calling them the Goonswarm Federation and not the Imperium, as has been their preferred nomenclature, and what I have stuck to calling them these past few months. That is because the Imperium, even if GSF does not want to admit it, is dead. It was a defensive coalition based around strong holdings in the north. Counting down the list of GSF's former coalition mates reads more like a mixed obituary and divorce proceedings than a list of allies at this point. SMA, almost completely collapsed with only a 300-man Dusk Corp holding it above the 500-man mark. CO2, turned to the side of the Money Badger coalition and holding a larger chunk of previously Imperium space. Razor, functionally Y-dotted previously with the acquisition of 4S and fully so with the leaving of both Roving Guns and Gladiators of Rage to MC Dot and Chaos respectively. FCON left the Imperium on good terms to find a new home within either the Vanguard Coalition or Stainwagon, depending on what day it is and who you ask. TNT seems to have kept relatively steady. Bastion, down nearly 700 members this month alone. This leaves Goonswarm Federation almost entirely alone in terms of being a strong, self-sustaining alliance within the Imperium, and whilst I would expect them to still lug around the alliances and help them to not cascade to the point of actually becoming non-entities, even the facade of being a coalition of equals is now almost painfully obvious in its falsity.
Gonna make something to eat real quick, but it won't take long. Gonna make something to eat and pee. I won't be gone by like 3 minutes here.
There were few left on the offensive. The Losec coalition had fallen apart over the course of June, as is perhaps unsurprising for roving pirates, and while I Want Isk was still willing to fund the war with their incredible wealth, much of the impetus for the initial invasion had vanished. While ostensibly driven by profit, this narrative was undermined when almost all of the Money Badger coalition abandoned the offensive, their members exhausted from the fighting and content with their victory. By the time the Imperium had completed its invasion of Delve and lodged themselves in, the only alliance pursuing them was Test, believing that if the offensive was continued, they could stamp out the goons entirely. But without the support of the rest of the Money Badger coalition, there was little hope of cracking the defenses of what remained of the Imperium. The supercapital fleet of the goons was still far too strong, and without allies, they were eventually forced to retreat. Again, Nullsec was fractured, and after half a year, they could return to their numerous smaller wars, which was normal. But this war had elucidated myriad problems for Crowd Control Productions, and even as the company desperately attempted to juggle its other projects, it would have to continue its custodial duties to EVE Online, or lose their only reliable source of income. Even before the war had begun, casinos were a contentious topic for more than the players. Crowd Control Productions consistently had to dedicate valuable and limited resources to monitoring the players involved in them, and bankers were frequently flagged for investigation for real money trading and subsequently banned, a detriment both to the company and to the casino, the latter of whom would need to dedicate further time and resources to training new bankers. But the casinos represented an existential problem for EVE Online. As had been doubted but now demonstrated over the course of the war, it was feasible for a faction with enough liquid assets to determine the shape of all of New Eden, and these factions already existed in the form
Your skill
of
has
casinos,
increased.
with the bulk of their money-making mechanisms hosted outside of the game, where it was difficult for crowd control productions to exert their influence. Compared to other in-game methods of generating profit, the casinos were too efficient. This was in part due to their clientele. While many less wealthy players participated, many of the richest had concluded that there was little to do with their amassed wealth, and so would bet and lose large amounts at the casinos. While the Imperium barely managed to survive the war with clever tactics designed to prolong conflict, and by moving farther away from its enemies, it was clear that any faction not operating its own casino would be unable to compete financially, and by extension, militarily. But the gambling magnates were not simply content to continue collecting money in EVE. Rather, they were preparing a total takeover of the financial markets, predicated upon an important expansion to the game released initially in April of 2016.
I found my niche. This is it. This is it. I might pay for the yearly and just play this, and if not this retail. I bet they have hardcore to retail, and I'm gonna definitely play that. If they had hardcore to retail, I will absolutely play that.
And instead allow players to establish much more entrenched positions. While intricate and requiring significant setup, the plan itself was straightforward. By creating a web of stations throughout all of New Eden, players aligned with the gambling magnates would be able to utilize a special kind of cargo hauling ship called jump freighters, in tandem with the station's unique properties to make themselves untouchable. Much like other large ships, these jump freighters were able to eschew the Stargate network by jumping directly from one system to another within a certain range, and one potential destination for a jump would be these new upwell structures. If the ship's jump arrival was close enough to an upwell structure, then they would immediately tether to it, making them completely invulnerable to damage. By jumping directly from structure to structure, there would be no time during which a jump freighter would be vulnerable, making it impossible to disrupt supply lines or trade routes without assaulting these sturdy structures. This safety would make their stations the most attractive to traders and buyers, which is where the final mechanism in the plan allowed them to make their profit. All goods bought and sold in these stations, in which players could dock like existing stations, were subject to a tariff collected by the station owner. If they could become the primary method of trading, especially in dangerous regions of space, then the gambling magnates could make untold amounts of money. This scheme was given the tongue-in-cheek name of the New Eden Trading Company. Their utility extended beyond acting as hubs for trade, however, and it was this fact that would, conceivably, make them nigh untouchable. While the immediate use for this network was to make the transit of jump freighters safer, they could likewise be used by any capital and supercapital ship, allowing for relatively safe passage, and this would require good standing with the gambling magnates. If they succeeded in their plan, then any party working against them would become a more vulnerable military target. But their dreams of a trading empire would be cut short by Crowd Control Productions. On October 12, 2016, they made a bold update to their end-user license agreement, with one particular section highlighted in an announcement. You may not use, transfer, or assign any game assets for games of chance operated by third parties. They then clarified, this addition to the EVE Online EULA means that as of the launch of EVE Online Ascension, players will be prohibited from using in-game assets and currency, as well as the EVE IP, to take part in or promote gambling services or other games of chance that are operated by third parties. With this in mind, as of this announcement, we have taken action against 2 organizations that are currently offering third-party services based around gambling and games of chance. The third-party service I Want ISK has been shut down in-game, and all ISK and assets have been confiscated after extensive and exhaustive investigation has brought forward compelling evidence of large-scale real money trading. Permanent account suspensions have been issued against those involved. The third-party service EVE Casino has been shut down in-game, and all ISK and assets have been confiscated after multiple and sustained breaches of our developer license agreement. Permanent account suspensions have been issued against those involved. As of the launch of EVE Online Ascension, the hosting of and participation in any form of third-party gambling service that utilizes in-game assets, currency, or the EVE IP will be strictly prohibited. End quote. But there was a major piece of information missing in this press release. Who had been banned? After investigating them, a large number of I Want ISK's bankers had been targeted, but the most notable names were Lenny Kravitz II and Iron Bank, the architects of the war, though they continued to protest their innocence. Lenny would take to Reddit to inform everyone that the trade network would continue as planned, but it would face stiff resistance. After being beaten back into Delve, the Imperium lacked much of their old infrastructure, but they still wielded one of the most threatening fleets in the game, and they would be joined in attacking some of the early structures in the trade network by some of their former enemies in the Money Badgers, intent on preventing its eventual establishment. With such powerful forces arrayed against it, and few willing to come to its defense without being paid, its future was in question, as the limitless supply of money from the casinos was now suddenly gone. How much money they still had left over was unknown. Crowd Control Productions' decision to forcibly dissolve the gambling corporation dramatically altered the shape of New Eden's future, which they hoped would improve the health of the game, but even as they did so, they would finally lay another part of New Eden to rest. At last, in February of 2016, Crowd Control Productions announced that they would be shutting down the servers for Dust 514 in May, only 3 months later. This was not a surprise for contemporary players who had been monitoring the ongoing development of the game.
Your skill has increased.
Live for only 3 years. 2 years prior, when the company announced the development of Project Legion, players of Dust were concerned that this new FPS was being developed because CCP lacked faith in their console-exclusive shooter title, in spite of their confident rhetoric. This concern was bolstered by the way that Project Legion was framed upon
more like the faith in the PS3. Worst console ever made, and that was the one they chose to do Dust. They should have just waited till the PS4. They would have been so popular.
Quote, it's taking all we learned from Dust and almost making a new...
I could have told you the PS3 was a flash in the pan the day it hit. I knew it was. I know because I wasn't going to buy one.
End quote. With some of the Dust team now working on an entirely different title, future updates were in question. Another CCP
they couldn't see it, and you can't blame them. They'd have to be perfect somehow to see it.
Dust, at the same time as he spoke of his hopefulness for Project Legion, as VG247 paraphrased it, quote, it's in the same IP, same place, and all the rest of it, but we want to do some fundamentally different things with it that we feel we missed out on and that we didn't do right with Dust. Honestly, we didn't make a great
do
game
something for my dinner. I'll be right back.
We tried to do too much. End quote. Even as CCP Games proclaimed the success of Dust, their employees seemed to deride it in favor of their new project. The concerns of the players proved correct, and after one final major content update in 2014, the game would only see maintenance and hotfixes until its death in May. But major changes were happening to EVE Online itself as well, and the introduction of Citadels promised to dramatically alter how warfare worked in New Eden. In contrast to the bosses that had come before, the largest tiers of upwell structures could house capital ships, with the monumental Peak Star even able to house Titans, meaning that any station could act as a staging site both for attack and defense.
Oh no, did I get Link? Not for long. I'll take the full health one. Yeah. Kill the low health one.
Your skill has increased.
Initiated simply by refraining from any offensive action for a full minute, again rendering the player's ship invulnerable. The defensive advantage this afforded to players was immense, and their ability to house fleets meant that invading any territory with upwell structures would become significantly slowed, if not blunted entirely. This was particularly helpful to the Imperium, who now had been granted the space to nurture their coffers and rebuild with their core members, waiting for them to return and to bring others into their organization. What's more, the defensive capabilities of these structures were significant beyond their support role. They could be equipped with weapons and modules similarly to a ship, projecting power against anything that came too close and being granted reinforcement timers, much like other structures. Keepstars were even granted their own doomsday weapons. But the introduction of upwell structures had another unintended effect. Before the Citadel update, the parts necessary for capital and supercapital ships were constructed at specialized bosses, which could be destroyed in raids if an opposing faction knew where to find them. Now, these production capabilities could be moved into heavily fortified stations. This meant that significant resources could now be funneled into the production of large ships with significantly less risk. What's more, this safety allowed for mining to be performed in nullsec at a capacity previously unheard. A sudden increase in mining output was precipitated by the Rorqual, a specialized capital ship proficient at rapidly mining asteroid fields, and the changes enacted by the Citadel expansion made them far safer to field and easier to protect. The wealth amassed by all nullsec powers began to reach what had once been ludicrous extremes. What followed was a long period of stagnation. While the existing powers would occasionally lash out at one another in massive battles, territory changed hands more sparingly than before, and nullsec gradually divided into three large power blocks who had little interest in earnestly attacking one another, a state of affairs that came to be known pejoratively as the Blue Donut, referring to the disk shape of nullsec around Empire space. Soon, the rapid proliferation of massive supercapital ships became nigh unstoppable, yet with few targets, their use was limited. Despite the relative power of the upwell structures, the potential effects of the proposed trade network were too threatening to the nullsec powers, who lashed out against the citadels which served as its foundation. Without the money flowing from the casinos, the endeavor was cut short in 2017. For the next few years, New Eden was relatively quiet as the powers in nullsec amassed wealth and bided their time, unchallenged except by one another. Many agreed that, with the introduction of citadels, a protracted era of peace had begun, one far different from the New Eden that most had come to know, fueled by the safe income enabled by upwell structures. Even though the grand trade network envisioned by the one-time casino owners hadn't come to pass, many players established upwell structures in high-security space and allowed players to trade there, taking a broker's fee from every transaction. In March of 2016, EVE blogger Greedy Goblin made a post detailing his concerns over an increase in the amount of money that players could make in these citadels, writing that, quote, "There won't be any serious wars. ever. Do you remember whining over top-down income because of moons? Imagine something 10 times bigger, without siphons, without having to fuel towers, without hauling, without even logging in. Remember that if you can RMT 1 billion ISK for $7, the trade citadels net you $200,000 per month. You don't choose playing a video game over getting such money. Every major alliance leader and FC will agree to keep the peace and stomp on anyone trying to disturb it. Such peace will obviously mean the end of Eve. End quote.
The end of Eve. Blah, blah, blah.
Years later, on October 15th, 2018, in the establishment of the Tranquility Trading Tower, a Keepstar-class citadel, the largest and most powerful available. Deployed by test and supported by the Imperium, this Keepstar was meant as a central location for their alliance's traders to sell their wares, where the broker's fees could be collected and split between them and their allies. The location of this station was also conspicuous. It had been deployed in the system of Perimeter, immediately next to Jeddah and its all-important trade hub. Prior to this, their enemies in Federations NC. And PanFam had held a monopoly on trade in this vital system, but the establishment of this Keepstar and Test's ferocious defense of it ensured its survival, and soon, nobody was willing to strike out against the Tranquility Trading Tower. For a time, its survival seemed uncertain, but soon, PanFam, the Imperium, and Legacy Coalition, three of the major power blocks in Nullsec, agreed to split the money generated by the tower, despite their shaky relationship. This all but guaranteed its survival going forward, as these three came to be the dominant forces in Nullsec and exerted significant market pressure on the whole of New Eden. As players reckoned with the effects of these drastic changes, skirmishes still would occur between belligerent parties, but even if the stakes were less sweeping, the scale of combat had drastically changed. Speaking with Down the Rabbit Hole, Fleet Commander Asher recalled a war in 2018, 2 years after the Citadel's patch was released, when they launched an incursion into Northern Territory with their refreshed supercapital fleet. This culminated into a massive fight over a vulnerable Keepstar in the system of X47LTAC-Q, a fight that ostensibly should have been unwinnable due to the dearth of benefits that the Keepstar provided to the defending fleet. Not to be outdone, however, Asher hatched a plan. In spite of the powerful modules that could be fitted onto a Keepstar, its most useful tool was tethering. When a player fired their ship's weapons on another player's ship, it would begin what was known as a weapon timer, which precluded the attacker from utilizing the tether or docking for a full minute. Once the minute had elapsed, the player could again be tethered and docked, meaning that while protecting the Keepstar, all a defending ship would have to do if targeted was refrain from firing any weapon for 60 seconds, and then their ship would become invulnerable until they were prepared to enter the fight once again. This problem was exacerbated for the attacking Imperium forces due to a bug. When a Titan fired a Doomsday, a 5-minute weapon timer was supposed to be applied instead of the usual 1-minute timer. But if the target of the Doomsday died to the blast, then the 1-minute timer was applied instead, making it difficult to target vulnerable enemy Titans. But there was a way to prevent enemy ships from tethering to a station: warp scramblers. If a ship was warp scrambled, not only was it prevented from engaging its warp drive and traveling elsewhere in the solar system, but it would also be prevented from tethering until the warp scramble was broken. To this end, Asher ordered warp scramblers fitted to a small fleet of supercarriers, what had once been known as motherships. These ships, typically deployed at long range and dealing their damage through the use of small strike craft, would serve a singular purpose. They would leap directly into the enemy fleet and deploy their warp scramblers on any vulnerable ship.
It's good play.
The tether for as long
they can't leave.
Beset by this new strategy, there seemed to be no correct answer. If the defending fleet attacked the supercarriers, then they would lose valuable time to damage the main enemy fleet, but if they attacked the Imperium's Titans, then the key defensive benefit of the Keepstar would be entirely nullified. This was compounded by the sheer defensive potential of these supercarriers, which Asher estimated at the time to be 75% that of a Titan for only 20% of the cost. A fantastically cost-effective trade for the utility that these specialized supercarriers provided. The pressure from the
mothership's more,
was too great, and they were able to deplete the armor of the Keepstar. When its hull was exposed a short time later and the Northern Fleet rallied to defend it, the pilots fell back behind one another in an attempt to avoid being targeted themselves, lest a
Your skill has
arrive
increased.
to lock them in place and deny them their tether, leaving only a fraction of available ships to return fire. This second battle was won without a single warp-disrupting supercarrier deployed. Despite this fantastic victory, the
Your skill has
territorial
increased.
gains were minimal, and instead of pressing their advantage, the Imperium retreated back to their home systems, further emphasizing in the minds of players the immortality of the Blue Donut. The sheer size of this battle was beyond what had been seen for years, and the number of Titans deployed was unthinkable a few short years prior. But this raised a question. If the proliferation of supercapital ships had reached such an absurd level, what would an all-out war look like, and was one even feasible given the state of the game? Even before the Battle of X-47, another battle had broken the record for the most number of players in a single fight, with over 6,000 as the Imperium attempted to destroy a Keepstar held by Pandemic Horde. But given the resources that the different factions had amassed, this was clearly far from the level of destruction that was possible. It would take another 2 years, but the answer would eventually be known, and it would defy the scale of anything that had been seen in the entire history of New Eden. While the players of EVE Online reckoned with the effects of these drastic changes made to New Eden's
Nice, he's up to 5 years ago.
Crowd Control Productions continued work
Crowd
on
Control
their
Productions.
first-person shooter title, which they renamed to Project Nova. And in October of 2018, at a special event for EVE fans in Las Vegas, they allowed reviewers to play an early build of the game, both in its cooperative and competitive modes. Reports from reviewers were generally hopeful.
Oh, I hit 22. I forgot. I have Gear 2 now. Oh my god, that makes this so much better. Oh, thank god.
Dust 514. But those who had the opportunity to test it also noted that the game, while enjoyable, would require something unique to draw a player base, something that was still missing from what was playable. Gaming journalist Joe Screbbles, writing for IGN, echoed other reports when he stated that, quote, "It's challenging, hectic, and, it must be said, unspectacular. What I played is an early build, so elements may change, but no matter how right it feels under the fingers, Nova doesn't quite connect in terms of excitement right now. Sound effects are oddly muted. A space magnum with exploding bullets shouldn't sound like my oven door closing. Enemies appear without fanfare and traipse around the gunmetal battlefield unthreateningly, and even the act of evacuating at the end of a round feels lacking in peril. Given that I've criticized Dust for exactly opposite issue, it might seem a little damned if they do, damned if they don't, but I can't stop thinking that a solid foundation isn't quite enough at this point. CCP does have wider plans for Nova and even more hopes, but crucially, I don't see any evidence of them other than being told they could exist one day. It's promised that Nova will bring a level of customization to suit even EVE players, creating custom clone trooper builds piece by piece from hundreds of options. But what I see are the game's introductory classes, built more like the set heroes currently in vogue in FPS games." End quote. The pressure on the company to release a popular title would only increase with time. On September 6, 2018, Crowd Control Productions was bought by another company named Pearl Abyss,
Crowd Control
a game
Productions,
publisher known for the popular MMO title Black Desert Online. Players were nervous. Black Desert Online utilized a radically different monetization strategy compared to EVE Online, eschewing the subscription-based model in favor of the now far more popular free-to-play method, with numerous microtransactions, selling in-game items such as weapons, consumables, cosmetics, and, most importantly, loot boxes. By targeting a small number of players willing to spend exorbitant amounts of money on microtransactions, called whales by the industry, video game publishers have managed to drastically increase their profit margins, introducing them even into full-price games to increase their revenue, and the most lucrative method of selling in-game items proved to be loot boxes. Rather than simply buying the items that they wanted outright, players in contemporary games instead were offered these boxes, which would contain a random item or set of items, with more desirable items being rarer and a chance for duplicates that the player already owned. This would attract not only those with significant disposable income, but gambling addicts as well, further widening the pool of whales.
Yay.
To conceal the chance-based nature of these rewards, and to avoid various countries' gambling regulations, they would often be veiled or obfuscated in some way, with these obfuscations growing more convoluted as time passed. But this method of monetization, to many players, was anathema to the new Eden that they knew. One of the most appealing aspects of the game was the fully player-driven economy, in which every object collected, crafted, and used was made by a long supply chain of players, and to damage that supply chain through the sale of microtransactions would potentially destroy what made the game so appealing. This was a fear that had been harbored ever since the internal magazine with the title Greed is Good was leaked, where the company had written extensively about their introduction into the game. While EVE Online could technically now be played for free by new players, the vast majority of content was locked behind a paid subscription fee, and most of the other games that still utilized a subscription fee had been released at around the same time as EVE Online. A game that had once been a pioneer in gaming technology now seemed outdated, at least from a business perspective. Some items available for purchase with real money had already been introduced, such as skill extractors, but the greatest fear of the player base was that the company would move beyond these smaller items and start selling.
All they need to do now is rehaul the combat.
Ships. More than
and they'd be
tools,
fine.
Ships were a social item as well, and represented great strides for player progression, with larger and stronger ships often a point of pride. One of the greatest leaps for many new players was moving from a venture, a small introductory mining ship, to a mining barge. This early goal is so ubiquitous that new players will often fall for scams involving
your
such
skill has
barges.
increased.
With Pearl Abyss's purchase of CCP Games, the possibility of selling such ships, and therefore the destruction of the player economy as the players knew it, seemed much closer than ever before. The role that Crowd Control Productions would take
Crowd
was
Control
not
Productions.
clear. An article by Chris Kerr for GameDeveloper.com read in part, quote, CCP will continue to operate independently as a developer from its studios in Reykjavik, London, and Shanghai, while Pearl integrates the Icelandic outfit's development and publishing expertise into its own pipeline. End quote. Less than 3 months after Pearl Abyss acquired Crowd Control Productions,
Crowd
Project
Control
Nova's
Productions
webpage was altered with a statement. It read in part, with familiar reassuring corporate prose and cliches, quote, over the course of Project Nova's development, we conducted a number of player research sessions with external partners, tirelessly playtested the game internally, and brought community stalwarts in to help us evaluate the project. Now, after taking all this research and feedback into account, we see that the gameplay experience in its current form does not live up to our original vision and would not achieve our ambitious goals for this project. As a result, we will not be moving forward with the upcoming invite-only alpha until further notice. We hope you understand that we need to take a step back and return to the drawing board, where we will spend more time figuring out how all this hard work can translate into something better and more meaningful for the EVE universe. Remaining true to our vision of Project Nova's future in connection with EVE is essential. Project Nova continues to evolve, and we remain committed to delivering a high-quality, team-based shooter experience to EVE Online fans, while exploring new and exciting opportunities to integrate the two games. CCP is in no rush to release Project Nova until we're satisfied it provides a rock-solid gameplay experience and visuals to match. End quote. Though Crowd Control Productions had released multiple standalone single-player experiences over the years, EVE players remembered the company's failures much more prominently, in large part due to their comparatively high profiles. As it was, the only major product that had managed to survive to that time was EVE Online. Their VR space combat game, EVE Valkyrie, had been released on March 28, 2016, but further development was halted only a year and a half later, despite what Rock Paper Shotgun called bullishness about VR only 7 months before the shutdown. EVE Online continued to be the only public-facing project that provided returns for Crowd Control Productions, and though it was public knowledge that the company had been hiring staff for a new, massively multiplayer online game, excitement
so I was just finishing my dinner.
EVE Online had long since been dampened.
Gotta eat sometime.
That excitement was being tempered by trepidation. This pattern continued when, on February 17th, 2020, Massively OP published an article titled Pearl Abyss had a strong Q4 2019, but CCP's EVE spin-off Project Nova is officially cancelled. In it, they described an investor call that stated that
it was
Project
good.
Nova was officially
Ramen.
cancelled, and that
I haven't had ramen in like a month or something.
Had been informed by the project's game director that, quote, we are evolving the scope of Nova beyond our previous.
I don't usually do ramen because I'm allergic to the gluten, but it's okay once in a while. I don't overdo it.
I'm personally optimistic about this, but also wistful. That also means that the Project Nova codename is retired, and the London team will find a new one. This is not a fiscal decision. The London team had been working on very interesting ideas and concepts, and adding them to a shooter sounds very promising to me. End quote. With the public knowledge that Black Desert Online was making 6.5 times the revenue of EVE Online, players and onlookers were nervous about Pearl Abyss's outlook on the game. But inside the game world itself, a long period of peace had established itself, and the leaders of every faction knew that if they were to keep their members entertained and playing for them, then something would have to change. Even if the game's system seemed uncompromising, every denizen of New Eden knew that war was inevitable, and when it began, the scale would be unprecedented. While much of New Eden had been watching the situation in Nullsec pensively and bracing for the effects that a large conflict might have, another group was seeing a resurgence. Early in New Eden's history, when Nullsec was first being colonized,
Great, a 50-second sleep.
Two of the major factions, the Stain Alliance and the Northern Coalition, had been founded in part by role players looking to play characters within the game world. But as time passed, this method of play had declined, as the players focused on efficacy took over their space and granted them few options to make an impact upon the game world. However, individuals would sometimes still engage in the practice, and among them was the character Katya Say. While the player had other characters with which they engaged in other sundry activities in New Eden, Katya was created with a singular goal in mind: to be the first character to visit every solar system in New Eden without losing a single ship. When her journey began on December 1st, 2009, the Apocrypha expansion had just been released, and with it, the new systems in wormhole space. meaning that there were 5,201 star systems in normal space to explore and another 2,604 systems in wormhole space, a total of 7,805 systems, enough that they knew that they would need to pace themselves. In an interview with Polygon, they said, quote, "I only did this for an hour and a half each day just to unwind after work. I wasn't killing myself doing this." End quote. The systems in Empire space were not difficult to visit, and Katya only needed to avoid gankers who were generally uninterested in destroying the small ships that they utilized. But as they moved into low-sec and null-sec, ships with the ability to cloak would be necessary, and for a character trained into such a specialized task, the skill requirements would be trivial. The player also had the skill set to avoid anyone who might be interested in destroying their ship, a kill mail that would certainly be coveted by anyone who could acquire it. In an interview for Down the Rabbit Hole, Katya stated that, with their experience, avoiding such hunters was a trivial affair. They would chronicle their travels by writing in a blog, role-playing as the character and capturing images of places that they found particularly beautiful or interesting, including the hull of Steve the Titan in C9N TAC CC. But their role-playing endeavors would extend much farther. The RIA expansion in 2014 had introduced a new, special wormhole system named Thera into the game, unique to other wormhole systems in that it featured numerous amenities unseen in other systems, such as approximately 12 entrances to normal space and indestructible NPC stations, making it an attractive system for players hoping to quickly travel from one location to another in normal space. Interested in the opportunities that Thera provided, a group of explorers gathered together under the name Signal Cartel, with the intention of creating
Your skill has increased
outlet for themselves in a highly competitive game. Their credo today, whose spirit has been maintained through the corporation's entire life, reads in part, quote, "Signal Cartel is a service corporation to all of New Eden. In this role, members are encouraged
Your skill
to
has
treat all
increased
players with respect, regardless of
Oh
affiliation.
no.
In challenging situations, our goal is to look for a graceful resolution and set an example of dignity and friendship through our actions. We embrace the attitude of a true explorer. We are friendly to others in our travels,
Your skill has
neutral
increased.
and never initiating aggression, and endeavoring at all times to be perceived by the New Eden
He's
community
gonna kill me, isn't
as
he?
a
I better
non-threat.
just run.
Among
Fuck
our
it.
own ranks and with others, we are patient and generous with knowledge, ideas, and experiences." End quote. This ethos appealed strongly to Katya, who was among the first to join, and by the end of the first year, they had amassed 700 members, a remarkable amount for such a niche corporation, which was thought to have limited appeal. Their most public-facing activity would be the establishment of Eve Scout, a tool that tracked the appearance, disappearance, and status of the numerous wormholes connected to Thera. By utilizing this list of connections, players could drastically decrease their travel time anywhere, though its lack of any NPC security meant that doing so was somewhat dangerous, given the sheer amount of traffic through it. Among other things, Signal Cartel's philanthropic aims included what they called rescue caches. Unknowledgeable, inattentive, or reckless players could sometimes find themselves stranded in wormhole space, and without the proper tools or assistance, it could be impossible to discover any route out, finding themselves stranded in hostile and unknown territory. Placed in systems all over wormhole space, these rescue caches were containers equipped with everything that a player needed to chart a route out of wormhole space, as well as a few other objects that the cache's creator might find amusing, such as fireworks for the player to launch in celebration of their rescue. On November 1st, 2018, 4 years after the Signal Cartel's founding, Katya Say would approach them in need of assistance. After 4 years, Katya had managed to visit all 5,201 star systems in New Eden, visiting many of the planets and chronicling the journey in their blog, and had begun visiting every wormhole system as well, still without losing a ship. A remarkable feat given the belligerence of the roving bands of players who made their home in wormhole space. But after visiting the first
Nah, with the right
2,000
ship, they
wormhole
would never be
systems,
able to
a
touch you.
problem that Katya had been dreading became an issue. The chaotic nature of wormhole space and its constantly shifting, labyrinthine pathways made it nigh impossible to find every one of the remaining 600 systems.
Nope.
They would need assistance, and their friends in Signal Cartel were more than happy to oblige. To find connections to the remaining systems as soon as they opened, they would crowdsource data from their players. To do so, they utilized a game tool made specifically for Signal Cartel members that assisted them in tracking the status of their rescue caches. But in this case, it allowed Katya and their small cadre of trusted players to see when a cartel member was in a remaining system on Katya's list. Speaking with Polygon, Katya said, quote, "When a system was found, we generally had less than 24 hours to get through the pass, and depending on how deep it was, the more critical it was to get there fast." End quote. Finally, on March 9th, 2019, Katya announced to the rest of New Eden their
You couldn't pay me to do that much scanning. These fucking nerds. How do you stand doing that? I couldn't do it.
That could be visited in just over 9 years without losing a single ship. The accomplishment was noted even by those who had shunned roleplay, and the character came to be one of the most famous in the game's history, with a monument created by Crowd Control Productions in-game to celebrate the success. Sometime after this achievement, Katya would become the leader of Signal Cartel, helping to manage it and continue the work of aiding those in and outside of wormhole space through Thera and their rescue programs.
Wormhole
but
people.
Even as Katya, Signal Cartel, and the rest of New Eden celebrated, those in Nullsec bent their aims toward a much different end, and they wouldn't have to wait long to see their plans come to fruition and take part in the most intense and expensive war that the game had ever seen. A war that would drag out far longer than any could have thought. The establishment of the Tranquility Trading Tower had ensured at least a measure of peace out of mutual economic interest, but as the years wore on, the fear of member attrition grew in the leaders of the various Nullsec powers. Many who had joined these factions did so with an interest in fighting in grand battles, and though the supercapital fleets grew, their use had dwindled. Fleet commanders would take their players on roams through Nullsec, looking for fights, but these wouldn't remain enough to sate their desire for battle, and there was concern that significant amounts of players would leave if not entertained. Murmurings of war propagated. Over the years, as more contained wars forced out smaller alliances and corporations from Nullsec,
your skill has
the
increased.
political situation simplified itself into power blocks. To the west was the Imperium, operating out of their home regions of Delve and Fountain, which had historically been the prize of and home to the most powerful factions in the game, and this period was no exception. To the south and southeast was Legacy Coalition, a group of associated independent states that formed after the war in 2016 and conquered significant territory over the intervening 4 years. To the north and northeast was a larger group going by Panda Fam, consisting of some of the most venerable corporations. In June of 2020, as players began to return to EVE Online in expectation of war, EVE YouTuber Yinton estimated that the Imperium had 50,000 characters, Legacy Coalition had 45,000, and Panda Fam had 62,000. The distinction of characters was important due to the propensity of EVE players to have multiple accounts, a practice that Crowd Control Productions now subtly encouraged through its user interface. Yinton attributed the growing tension in Nullsec to the decayed relationship between the Imperium and Legacy Coalition, the latter of which was home to Test Alliance, who had a complicated past with the Imperium, at times cooperative.
I hope this brings like 10,000 people to EVE. I would be so happy.
In the last major war, hoping to eradicate the Imperium. While they had worked together to fight against their mutual enemies in the north years prior, Test attacked a smaller coalition in the northwest, a coalition that the Imperium was supporting. and according to Yintan, the Imperium and Legacy Coalition fought against one another in small-scale battles, but the Imperium's allies would fall, leaving a dearth of territory awaiting capture. As Pandafam alliances moved
Your
into
skill
this
has
territory
increased.
and skirmished with the Imperium, however, Pro-God Legend, the leader of Test Alliance and one of the principal leaders of Legacy Coalition on the Imperium's southern border, made a strong allusion to war at an Alliance town hall.
Your skill has
Reacting to
increased.
this, and likely other intel gathered from their intelligence network, the Imperium withdrew from their less defensible territory, shipping all stations and goods that they could to their core regions to prepare for what they knew was coming.
Your skill has increased.
Approximately a week after Pro-God Legend's statement, a post made to the Imperium News Network website alleged that, quote, "The past couple of months, Pro-God Legend has run around talking to basically every alliance who has ever shot at the Imperium
Your
and
skill
got
has
them
increased.
on board with the idea of invading us." End quote. The Mittani, leader of the Imperium, announced publicly the
225.
strategy that they would employ for what was now understood to be an imminent war. He had commanded all members of the Imperium to fall back to Fountain and Fortress Delve, as well as the more peripheral regions of Quarius and Period Basis, where they would establish their defenses at choke points in anticipation of the impending attack. Soon afterward, the leaders of Legacy Coalition announced their withdrawal from the Non-Invasion Pact, which dictated a 2-week grace period before an invasion would be permitted by the agreement, though as was perhaps to be
Your skill has
expected,
increased.
various breaches of this stipulation were ignored by both parties. The goal of this war was clear, one that echoed the goals of the war 4 years prior.
Currently, there are well over 400 Titans converging from all over Eve, and that will combine with our Titan fleets from Legacy and Fire and all of our allies, and it will be the largest Titan force ever assembled in EVE Online. Most of Eve is unified around one goal: that this time, goons must finally be destroyed. All of the alliances joining forces today have agreed that we will not make the same mistake we made in Eve 4B. We will see this through to the end. Months from now, when this war is won, we will finally be looking at an Eve that is worth playing.
Once again, the vast forces of Nullsec and beyond gathered together, but this time there would be no outside funding. Using the resources amassed during the years of peace, the united forces of Legacy Coalition and Pandafam would fund this war themselves, with the express purpose of destroying the Imperium once and for all. This temporary alliance between these two massive coalitions against the goons would be called PAPI, a portmanteau of Test Alliance's abbreviation TAPI and Pandafam. While the goals of the previous war were more nebulous, this time victory was singularly defined: the complete eradication of the Imperium. The roles of the participants in this war were also clear. The Imperium had willingly nestled themselves into just a few regions, preparing to act as the defenders against the invading forces of PAPI. This concentration of military might was a boon. All of the resources of the Imperium were now centrally located, and any ships or modules necessary could be moved from one front to another with relative ease and speed. Their centralized, autocratic organizational structure also meant that making important decisions would be a rapid process, something that had historically proven vital in New Eden. Despite the Defenders' advantage, the war seemed to be almost a foregone conclusion. PAPI's forces constituted the combined populations of Legacy Coalition and Pandafam, and together they outnumbered the population of the Imperium 2-1. At this stage in New Eden's history, when population was vital for any alliance, these numbers seemed insurmountable. But the Imperium's defenses were stout. If defended tenaciously enough, any gains made by PAPI forces would be incremental and costly. In an unprecedented show of solidarity and mutual effort, multiple alliances on the attacking PAPI side moved their Titans into position, prepared to siege the home systems of the Imperium. But if PAPI forces were to successfully attack the primary home systems of Fountain and Delve, a multi-pronged offensive would be necessary. Attacking from the southern systems would be brutal, if not impossible. The Quarius and Period basis regions were separated from their easterly neighbors by a massive distance, too far to make a jump. But the only other option was, in practice, unacceptable. Moving fleets of capital ships through the traditional Stargate network was a dangerous proposition, due to the pattern in which ships arrived through them, making them extremely vulnerable to attack, and such a decision was considered out of the question in the vast majority of cases. And so, the invaders from the south decided to take a different route, instead coming through HiSec through the system of FWST TAC-8. Technically, neither this system nor a few nearby systems belonged to the Imperium, but rather they were irrevocably claimed by a non-player pirate faction called the Blood Raiders, meaning that defensive structures such as Sinojammers couldn't be deployed. Either side would have the freedom to deploy capital ships to FWST TAC-8 as they so chose. Forcing their way through this route, however, would be brutal and costly, and the fleets were harried by the forces of the Imperium constantly. And the entire time, the Imperium fleet commanders were studying Pappy's fleet movements carefully. Finally, after months of grinding battles, the Pappy fleets made it to their destination. The goal of Pappy forces was to anchor a Keepstar as a base out of which they could prosecute the war on the northern front, a boon that would make raids and attacks into Imperium territory far easier. If the Imperium could blunt this attempt, then victory would almost be assured. Pappy would attempt to anchor the first Keepstar in the beginning of October, and the Imperium were ready, with hundreds of dreadnoughts prepared to bring their heavy weapons to bear against the Keepstar before it could come online. When the Imperium arrived, they were significantly outnumbered by the Pappy forces, a trend that would continue to repeat itself throughout the war, and they had little hope of driving their foes from the battlefield. However, their definition of victory was not to push back the enemy fleet. Rather, they needed only to destroy the Keepstar, a goal that superseded any concerns over cost. As the dreadnoughts focused their fire, they in turn were targeted by enemy ships, and they began to drop one by one. But the damage output of these siege batteries was too great for the Keepstar to weather, and the structure would be destroyed before it could come online. Despite achieving their objective, the toll was extremely heavy for the Imperium, with 250 of the attacking dreadnoughts destroyed, significantly more valuable than what Pappy had lost. And so, they tried again. But the response from the Imperium would shock both New Eden and the gaming community at large. On October 6th, the second Keepstar was deployed. Pappy ships surrounded it, ready to defend it against what the fleet commanders expected to be a massive response from the Imperium's supercapital fleet by stationing their own Titans around the Keepstar. But what they received instead was an unbelievably massive swarm. In an offensive that mirrored the old strategies from the beginning of Goonswarm, thousands of players from the Imperium arrived in Raven battleships armed with long-range missile weapons and charged headlong into the fray. What would come to be known as the Fury of FWST TAC-8 had begun. As the battle escalated and more ships arrived, time dilation automatically activated, reducing the speed of all actions to 10% of their normal values and allowing support ships to arrive much faster relative to the pace of the fight, further increasing the scale. As the hours wore on and more battleships arrived to replace those lost, Pappy leadership realized that the damage was too great for the Keepstar to bear, and forces were scrambled to intercept Imperium ships as they arrived. But the flood of incoming Imperium forces was too great to stem. As the fight spilled into the following day, the Keepstar disintegrated, and Pappy ceded the field. Whether they knew so or not, those who attended the fight had made history. According to CCP, the battle in FWST...
He paralyzed himself, that's funny. Well, I'll fucking re-paralyze you then. He doesn't like that.
more than had ever been seen in the game.
Don't be casting blank or anything. I would hit this hit
While
now.
losing 2
Yep,
Keep
kill him
Stars
now.
was a heavy toll, the losses suffered by the Imperium were even greater. But unlike previous
Your
wars,
skill has
the
increased.
vast accrued wealth of all sides made such losses far less impactful than they had been in the past. At this stage, the 3 more important factors were strategic objectives, available population,
Your skill has increased.
and as always, morale. For Imperium leaders, such monetary losses helped to show their resolve. But Happy was not.
Your skill has increased.
3 more times they would attempt to deploy a Keep Star as a forward base of operations, and each time the Imperium swarmed with their battleships to batter it with missiles and prolong the assault. But finally, on the 19th of October, in the system of YZ
225 off him.
they would
Not
fund
bad.
purchase. Imperium forces once again arrived in their missile-laden Raven battleships, but this time
I don't know. There's
were
2 of them.
prepared.
That might could be really could be
Rather than
death.
allow the
Oh
enemy
God.
fleet and
Kill
their
him.
reinforcements to arrive at a safe range, they surrounded the nascent
Just shoot through the
Keep Star
dome, it's
in
fine.
warp disruption bubbles, which pulled the arriving enemy ships into range of the entire defensive fleet. By calling their targets carefully, battle groups could pick off the battleships one by one with little trouble. The Imperium was forced to cede the field. Rossi's OP and Eve
Your
Player
skill
and
has increased.
Keeper chronicling the war estimated that about 140 warp disruption bubbles were deployed for the purpose, each of which was then destroyed by the Pappy forces, so that they could enter their newly anchored Keep Star. In reference to a popular science fiction show, the method
That
by which
hurts,
it was
son of a
defended
bitch.
and the number of attempts to anchor a
Damn it.
station, this new structure was dubbed Bubble-on 5. The tactic of bubble wrapping a station was not a new idea, but according to Asher, this
Oh
tactic
God, I
had
better
been
be ready to
explicitly
charm,
banned
actually.
by
Oh,
the
I'm
game
sitting on a gob.
masters of EVE Online until special permission
That's not
was
good.
secretly given to Pappy forces to perform it. In response to this claim,
Arrow
Arrow
God, at least it was on him and not me.
To Reddit, which read, despite what
Arrow
he's
God
saying
again,
seems to
son
be,
of a bitch,
placing
2 Arrow Gods.
140 anchored bubbles
Charm
on a
him.
grid is
I didn't
not
get it.
an
I'm dead.
exploit.
I'm dead.
Whatever the case may
Whatever,
have been,
that's okay.
Bubble-on 5 would stand.
That's okay.
The war had
Bad luck
dragged
there.
on for
Double
2
Aragog
months
for
from
100
the summer
damage or
into
whatever
the
it
autumn
was.
of
So
2020, and there was hope.
Good
for
luck,
most of
you know,
you,
that-
even
it
if
happens
this
once in a
Keep Star
while.
would perpetuate
fucking
a
game
swift
steals your
end to the
quarters.
war,
It's the only
one
game
that
I've ever
would
seen that
again see the
consistently steals your
Imperium
quarters.
defeated
It's
and this
you
time
can't win
obliterated.
sometimes. It's just like,
Such
yeah,
wishful
nah,
thinking
this
would
thing
prove
crit you, and
comedically wrong.
it got a bad
Shortly
roll.
after
Or sorry, it
this
got a
Keep
good
Star
roll,
was
and
anchored,
it crit
the
you for
Russians of the Red
175
Alliance
on your
announced
219
suddenly
health
that
bar.
they
You
were
can't
changing
win.
their allegiance from
Kinda shit like
Happy
that.
to the Imperium, bolstering the forces of the defenders who
I
were
am
suddenly
enjoying it
taking
immensely.
losses to their
It plays out
infrastructure
pretty
and
well.
facing incursions that disrupted their resource harvesting operations.
I think it teaches you to play the
damaging
game
both
pretty
their
well.
reserves and their morale. In order to preserve some of their industry, the Imperium made the decision to enact a gate camp in a choke
I could
point
do
leading
Puppet,
to
too,
a
which
large
is cool.
dead-end area of Delve, now vital
Let's go to
for
Dunes,
resource
and we'll just switch it up each
harvesting, a
time.
situation likened to Helm's Deep. As
So
long
we
as
go
the
back.
defenses held and the Sino-jammers were active to prevent any capital ships from jumping in, the industrialists could continue to gather their resources and produce the tools for war. But there was now no question. Delve was under siege. While significant assets were being lost, direct fights were uncommon, as neither side was willing to commit to risky, decisive battles, instead choosing to fight only over major strategic objectives such as Bubble-on 5, and Happy continued to spill from the north into Quarius as well, foregoing the southern connections entirely. The next major fight, however, would once again break records. And
If
the
these
price
are
of the
EM,
war
oh,
would
there's
reach
if any of them are
absurd levels.
EM, like
Toward the beginning
that
of
that
the
one's
war,
DC.
Asher had bragged that not a single
Take him.
Keep Star had been destroyed, but after the
Yes,
establishment
beautiful.
of Bubble-on 5, Pappy had specifically chosen to target the numerous Keep
This
Stars
one's
to
DC.
break the defenses. This effort was proceeding at a grinding
Let's
pace
see how he does
compared
on a
to
fly-
other
on a
wars in
fly.
the past. It had already been raging for over 6 months, which dwarfed most other wars in the game, and at the turn of the year, the Imperium
Yeah,
was
doing
making
well.
an effort to take back key systems in Delve. To do so, they lashed out against the Sino-jammers that Pappy had deployed in numerous systems. While they sent a major force to a system, they simultaneously attacked the Sino-jammer in the nearby system of M2 TAC XFE in a lightning strike. With the Sino-jammer destroyed, the Imperium were finally able to bring their supercapital fleet to bear, and immediately the signal was given. A beacon was lit, and a fleet of hundreds of these massive ships moved into position.
It can't seem to do this sail. It can't compute it. It's really weird. It's just frankly odd. I don't know, man. I don't know. I guess I'll just go cycle the stone if it means that I can move forward. Fucking dumb. I have too much stone on me and I can't do anything until I cycle it, so.
The Imperium forces all opened fire at once in a massive
yeah, this went well. Yeah, both of them are dead. Hells yeah. 140, not bad, not bad.
Battle, the Keepstar was forced into its reinforcement timer, meaning that there was no longer an objective to take. But in a move that surprised onlookers, neither side was
I love
willing
Beastmaster.
to
I forgot how much I
ground,
liked it.
and the fighting continued. At
Oh,
first, Pappy
the leech
appeared to
bled
be
out.
taking
That's
the
actually
fight,
good
but
for
server
me.
downtime
Yeah,
was
yeah,
coming,
good.
Meaning that all of the fighters would be logged off and wouldn't appear again until they logged back
Yeah,
in.
look, there's another
According
DC. He's
to
strong.
Frost,
He's
the
really
Pappy
strong for me.
forces failed to make the proper preparations to effect a
We're gonna
retreat
buff
from the
again,
fight,
yeah, here.
and after downtime, the Imperium pounced, placing warp disruption bubbles on the location where Pappy's Titans would return.
I could
when they
go
logged
to
back
Wings
in.
of Fury if I had enough
Pappy's
money.
ships were trapped. As long as the Imperium continued to place warp bubbles, these ships would be out of position when the reinforcement timer finished, and the Keepstar would be vulnerable again. Pappy spent the intervening days bringing more Titans to the front lines to assist the attack on the Keepstar, and when the time came to jump into position, they decided upon a bold strategy. They would jump in directly above the Keepstar, just out of range of the enemy, accepting a small
That's
sacrifice
perfect.
of Titans in order to bring the full weight of their ships to bear at once. The
Your
previous
skill has
battle had
increased.
attracted attention, and according to PC Gamer magazine, over 13,500 players were in position for this second battle.
Your skill has
Prepare for a
increased.
fight. This was a tactic that had never been implemented on this scale, and with good reason. With so many actors operating in the same area at the same time, the EVE servers had a tendency to react in unpredictable ways that were almost always more detrimental to the attacker than the defender, making it difficult for an attacking force to assail a position with too many enemies.
Yeah, one day the
Still,
internet will be
leaders
so
of
good this will
Pappy
be a thing of the
decided that
past.
this was a risk
Latency
that they
and
were
problems
willing
with
to
thousands
take.
of people and the
call
games will
was
get
made,
better.
And this unprecedented fleet made the jump simultaneously. The servers for EVE Online buckled, and strange things began happening. The jump was taking over 45 minutes to complete, and while the players waited to load the system, their Titans would arrive without them, completely bare of
Ooh, a
any
bag.
modules.
Yes,
The
that
waiting
saves me a lot of
Imperium
money.
jumped at the
Oh, look,
opportunity,
it makes it much
sending
easier,
the
yeah.
heavy fighters of their super carriers to destroy
Cool, we killed the
these
fly.
vulnerable
150.
naked
Yep, we're doing better out here.
Many of the Titan pilots of Pappy reappeared in the system from which they left, with their
There's a
Titans and
ghoul.
all of their modules intact.
He's DC.
Others, however, were not so lucky, and ships continued to trickle into
Yeah, go on
M2
him, yeah.
XFE for the Imperium to annihilate. This fight broke a new record. When converted to real-world fiat currency, it had cost over.
I love this shit. It's so peaceful. You just watch it like battle all day.
Estimated cost of the war.
I
well
could
past
die happy,
1
man, if they
million
brought hardcore to retail WoW, because then I would do the whole pet grind, the whole mini pet grind, and I would do the all the mini pet battles all over again. That would be so fun. All right, Ghoul, time to fight the sheep. He's freshly fucking charmed, so yeah, let's get close. I like watching it up close. It's like eating, like, you know. Oh, did I aggro another Ghoul? No, there's a goblin over there though. He's a mugger. He's tough. He I don't know. I better move. I could aggro him. Move over a little bit over here, and if the sheep dies, nah, sheep's kicking the Ghoul's ass. Yeah. Feels like each level is getting a little bit easier, like it's supposed to be hard from 18 to 22, but then it gets really easy once you get cured 2 and stuff. Just gotta watch the D-charms because they happen. Hey, it's raining. Yay. IRL.
Best dollars by any metric.
Yep, Ghoul's going down. Nice, not bad. He kicked that Ghoul's ass.
Because of the failure of the attack, those approximately
thought I buffed, but I guess
happy
not.
Titans which had been caught by the Imperium were forced to stay in limbo, ready to be destroyed the moment that they returned. But they wouldn't be abandoned.
That's a 10-minute buff. That's like a spell, thing.
Because, while
I guess the macro's broken is what it is.
To produce compared to the
I have Banish now.
of
That's kind of cool.
battleships, further increasing the importance of retrieving.
Let's feed
as
the sheep
many
to
as
him.
they could. Steve Messner, writing for PC Gamer,
Come on, man, go.
interviewed Titan pilot Dran Arcana about
What do you mean
the
too
plan
far
to break
away?
them out.
He is not too far away.
When
What are you
I asked
talking
Dran
about?
what the next step
Like
would
what?
be, he gave a vague answer about continuing the fight elsewhere until the right moment presented itself.
Gotta stay
to
away
stage
from
a
the bomb.
jailbreak. What I didn't know was that moment had already come. The day before, pilots received a personal message from Billy, Pappy's military commander.
He is killing the
Good
sheep. I should look for a new
afternoon,
target.
It read, your Titan/Super has been noted to be in bubbles.
I'll just grab
Please be
a
available to
leech
be
if he's a
online
problem.
Starting between 0430 and 0600 Wednesday.
I don't know. The sheep's
Eastern,
winning.
Tuesday night USTZ.
Go sheep.
Do not share this message with anyone. End quote. When the time came, almost a month after the camp had begun, approximately 170 of the Titan pilots were prepared, and as they logged in, Happy suddenly jumped subcapitals.
Alright, here's 917 fucking stone blocks. It's gonna make my stone cutting go really well.
Responded quickly, bringing a Titan fleet of their own to bear.
Oh, I'm back in it. Oh, I'm in it.
And they snuck a fleet
So he
of
killed my
over
sheep, yep.
400 dreadnoughts close to the Titans. As Pappy
Try another
Titan
sheep.
pilot Tony
Or well,
from PC
wait,
Gamer,
what's he? He's
quote,
a
"It
tough.
forced the Imperium to choose.
What about the
Continue
crab?
shooting or extracting
Crab is
Titans who
EP.
weren't shooting back
The
and
sheep
take extreme
is
losses in their own
DC.
Titans,
Let's get the sheep
or
because it
only
won't
shoot
despawn on
our
me.
Titans
Or it
with
won't
Doomsdays,
G-charm
but
me.
use their guns to save themselves from the onslaught of
Yuppers, and
dreadnought
now
fire.
let's cure
They
2.
chose the latter. The Titans were gradually able to worm their way out of those warp disruption bubbles that weren't destroyed by the arriving
Just
Pappy
eat a bomb
forces,
just to kill him.
and only 6 Titans were lost.
I got a weapon
number
skill. Here it
shared
is.
by the Imperium. In the
I gotta make the
meantime,
stun on my
Red
bar.
Alliance was
What is that?
striking
It's
back in
it's
the
it's
south, pulling
yeah,
significant
smash
Pappy
axe.
forces away from the front line in the Imperium's capital of Fortress Del. The
Am I using
centralized
smash
command
axe? Is
structure
that
of
what
the
it is?
Imperium meant that resources could be distributed where they were needed.
Gotta read the
with
macro.
primary consideration given to the
Nice, he was
survival and
188.
good of
They're
the
starting to
alliance as a
really
whole.
pay right
But
now. It's
Pappy
sweet.
were far more
Sit
splintered,
down.
and while they have been able to work together well enough in Delve, such distractions placed pressure on
Yeah,
those
it's smash
living in
axe is what I've been
southern
using.
regions
That's
to
the
protect
stun, is it?
themselves
Oh, it is.
and lead
Smash
the
axe
front
is a
line.
stun, but it didn't even
From
do
Delve,
anything to
sending
him.
liquid assets to the Red Alliance for their fight
It
to
didn't
create
stun him, it
outsized
should've.
value.
Damn
What's
it.
more, other small alliances pounced on the weakened home systems of Pappy corporations, striking and taking territory.
If
while their
okay, let's
defenses
use
were away.
both.
Suddenly, Pappy alliances were losing territory, and the longer that they fought in Delve, the worse their losses became. The Imperium fleet commanders were also learning the patterns of their opponents in a way that opened up opportunities. After studying the way that their supercapital ships jumped together in a tight
DPS
formation,
and stun
they hatched a
weapon
plan,
skills. Yeah,
known
nice,
internally
going well
as
here.
Operation
So,
Enho,
that
but
Thread
known to
Leech is
others
tough.
by another name. The boson trap of YZ9 TAC F6.
Bosun,
It would
bosun,
be an ambush,
bosun.
the likes of which had scarcely been seen before. Such a tight grouping of ships
Six
left
boson
them
or whatever it
vulnerable
is.
to a
I forget the
particular
name.
kind of Titan doomsday weapon, a bosonic field generator, or as it's commonly known, a boson. This weapon, when activated, dealt damage in a cone in front of the ship, and while not nearly so oppressive as the original Doomsday weapon from years prior, its damage was still incredibly high for a weapon of its kind. While requiring careful coordination and tight restrictions on communication to prevent information from leaking, the plan in its essence was straightforward. When the supercapital ships of Pappy jumped into a fight, a fleet of Titans, all spread out across the
I was out of
solar
range.
system, would
It didn't
warp
look
to
like it.
predetermined
Come on, man.
locations, aim their bosons, and fire all at once,
You.
doing enough damage to wipe out the Titans clumped together. While it wouldn't be
He
enough
poisoned
to
the
turn
sheep as he
tide
left
of
with
the
bio,
war,
that's funny.
It would be an incredible victory. The day of the battle came, and
Oh,
everybody
got another
was
goblin.
prepared.
That's not
At
good.
first, there was concern that Pappy's
Oh, I can probably
supercapitals
take the
wouldn't
sand
even
here at
show,
least.
or they would jump into the
Your
wrong
skill has
location.
increased.
Get on
But
this
such worries
guy.
suddenly fell away when every Sinoshuro field was placed on top of one another, unprotected by warp bubbles. As Asher wrote after the battle, quote, "The load-in for their supers took forever. Our Titans were creeping closer in warp. Eventually, they started hitting grid and no supers had loaded, but the warp-ins were perfect. I thought again, if it works. We had executed the warp-in
18,
perfectly.
I mean,
A
yeah.
beautiful spread. A fleet
It's a little bit less, honestly, but I got a cycle out of it.
If you believe in a deity, we could use a few prayers
3273,
right now.
not bad.
End quote. Finally, all of the super capital ships from Pappy arrived, and the bosons were fired all at once, capturing the helpless
Not bad.
ships in the crossfire in a fantastic display. But as the bosons spooled
Not
down,
bad,
their
not bad.
targets continued floating in space, barely scratched. Due to a bug, only a tiny amount of the damage from the bosons have been applied. With the entirety of Pappy's fleet now in fighting position and the Imperium's Titans all in awkward locations, the only thing that the Imperium could do was retreat. Such a tactic would not be allowed by Pappy again. Months wore on as Pappy systematically destroyed the keepstars of the Imperium, and the gradual pressure even allowed them to lash out against the defenses in Helm's Deep. And over the course of months, system after system of Delve fell. Soon, the Imperium was locked in one final constellation of 7 systems, with their capital of 1EQ1 TAC A as a choke point. The sheer defensive abilities of the Imperium and the key choke point that allowed them to maintain sovereignty in the constellation meant that attacking directly would be foolhardy for Pappy, even given what they had learned in M2 TAC XFE about the effects of massive numbers of players in a single system. Though they had the Imperium surrounded, there seemed to be no way to break into the capital, and the longer they took, the more chaos brewed in their home systems, and the worse morale became. The purpose of the war was clear from the outset: demolish the Imperium. But the Imperium refused to budge. The longer that Pappy took to achieve total victory, and the more losses they took on the home front, the more morale dipped for the attackers. In contrast, the Imperium's morale was only building, as every day that they survived was another day that they defied the enemies that sought to eradicate them entirely from the game. The Imperium continued to hold until summer, when they finally began to strike back out, and Pappy could not afford to leave Delve without losing territory that they had fought so desperately to take and hold. The deciding event of the war, however, wouldn't be military, but economic. As Pappy had been laying siege to Delve, they had relied on the continuous income from the Tranquility Trading Tower. But suddenly, Crowd Control Productions announced a change that would reduce the taxes that players faced when buying and selling goods at NPC stations, making it more profitable to sell in Jita rather than at the neighboring Tranquility Trading Tower, meaning that the income for these corporations relying on the trading fees was suddenly and drastically
Smash
diminished.
Ass sucks.
While
Your
far
skill
from
has
the only
increased.
factor, it would prove to be the final one. The call was given. Happy alliances were ordered to unanchor
My
their
parry skills going up,
citadels
that's good.
and leave. Different outlets would blame different factors, including splintered interests among Pappy leaders, the loss of territory, low